Thought I was going to be able to go without my sunglasses. Hopefully I will. I want to thank Jim and John for this opportunity for me to come here. I did this 2 or 3 years ago. This is probably 90% more people here at this event than that, so I'm kind of nervous. The last time I was this nervous was the 6-year-old championship game last year when I watched my grandson play. I am known around here as a lot of different things. Miss Jane told me a funny story one time. She said she overheard a couple of probably T-baller mothers in their 20s, early 30s, and they were talking about the old gray-haired man that hangs around the boys in the batting cages. And one of them says, "I think that's Randy Rhino." And Jane kind of came up to him and said, "Yes, that is Randy Rhino." She couldn't wait to tell me their description of me. My latest probably notoriety, or what I'm known as now, is Katie Goldberg's coach this past summer. Katie was on the Titans this year, and we had a great summer. And Katie did some very special things for us if you've not seen her videos. Jim described a lot of nice things in my background. In every athlete's career, there's been bad days, and I've had my share of bad days. I told this story a couple of years ago, and if you've heard it, bear with me. It happened to me my junior year. We were playing the University of Tennessee up in Knoxville. They had a great team. We were okay. They had a great quarterback named Condridge Holloway, just an outstanding athlete. I had one of those games that absolutely was the worst game of my career. Condridge ran over me at the goal line for one touchdown. He threw a touchdown pass over my head for another one. It was just one of those games that I just wanted to get over with and forget. And I was standing on the sideline, and I watched that clock tick down to 0, and the horn went off, and I took off sprinting across the field. And I got about halfway across the field, and bam! I ran right over a little old lady that was walking across the field. I reached down, I picked her up, brushed her off. I said, "Ma'am, I'm so sorry, please forgive me." And she looked up at me and said, "Sonny boy, don't you apologize. That's the hardest you hit anybody all day." Tonight I'm just going to share some, I don't know, just I guess you would call them life lessons. I'm 59 years old and holding. I will be 59 the rest of my life, not going any further. I played 22 years. I started to figure this up. I played 22 years as a player. Now that's not pro. That's from the first time I can remember playing at 7 or 8 years old all the way through the time I retired. I have 36 years and counting of parenting 2 sons. And I've been a coach for over 30 years. So I have a few stories and just things that I've learned over that career, long career now. And I just want to share some of those things with the players and with y'all. To give you a little background, I was told by my parents that I was actually conceived at the Georgia Tech Married Student Housing, which is now Techwood Housing. That was back in 1952. My dad had played football at Georgia Tech. I come from a Georgia Tech family. My brother, Danny, was born exactly 11 months later. His birth actually started my competitive career. He and I went at each other from the time we were 1 or 2 years old, competed in everything. The first sport that I got to be pretty good at was competitive toy wrestling. And I pretty much handled, whenever I wanted a toy, I could usually take it away from my brother. He still reminds me of that. My brother and I competed over everything. When we were 5 or 6 years old, I got my first football uniform. It was for Christmas, and I never forget going downstairs under the tree. And my brother got a beautiful gold and white uniform, Georgia Tech. And I'm embarrassed to say, but my first football uniform was red and black. Otherwise, in my family, currently known and always will be known as the Evil Empire. My brother and I started playing competitive sports at 7 and 8 years old. There was no, back then in the 60s and 70s, early 70s, there was no small ball. You know, kids didn't start playing competitive sports till they at least got to 7 or 8 years old. My dad coached every single team that I played on from the time I was 7 or 8 till the time I went on to high school. His name, my dad, Chapel Rhino. To this day, I still consider the greatest coach I ever had. He's not the most famous coach I ever had. I had some pretty famous ones, Marv Levy, to name a few, Pepper Rogers. But my dad was the best coach I ever had. His ability to push me beyond my comfort zone, I think, was, and I would confuse it as my dad was very similar to me. If you've ever seen me coach, I get emotional when I coach. And my dad was a very emotional person, and sometimes when you're young, you confuse that with that your dad's upset with you, and he wasn't. He was just trying to make me better. He also helped me to get past my size. Now, you know, people look at me and they say, well, how did you do all the things that you did? And I don't have an answer for that, except to the fact that when I was growing up and I looked at other athletes, size did not register in my mind's eye. So I could look at a guy who was 6'2". Is this mic going in and out, y'all? I could look at a guy who was 6'2", and he looked exactly the same size as me. I mean, I just never, it was not that I was brave, it was just that in my mind's eye, I did not see size. I grew up in Charlotte, North Carolina, as Jim said, in the 60s, and I played football for the Star Clara Lions, like y'all are playing for NYO. And my brother and I were on the same team. My dad was the coach, and we were pretty darn good. We got invited to come down here to play in something they called the Peach Bowl back then, and they actually played it in Bobby Dodd Stadium. I went on to play high school at South Mecklenburg, graduated from Olympic High School. The recruiting process, you know, I was not recruited by a whole lot of people. University of North Carolina was really the only school that recruited me. And I actually had told my parents at one point that I thought I wanted to go to Chapel Hill and play football. That same week, Georgia Tech called me and invited me down for a visit. My mom said, I want you to go down and at least see Georgia Tech. Of course, my dad had played football at Georgia Tech. I had heard about Bobby Dodd all my life. And so I was a good son, and I did what my mother asked, and I went down to Georgia Tech and visited. Sat in front of Bobby Dodd and heard him tell me that he thought I could be the next Brent Cunningham, who was a small little back that Georgia Tech had during that time. And that was all I needed to hear, and I went ahead and committed to Georgia Tech. My career at Georgia Tech, my sophomore year, back then freshmen could not play varsity, and I had my freshman coach, a guy named Dick Bestwick. Coach Bestwick I still communicate with. He's a mentor of mine. He has probably an email list of players that he has coached over the years, and weekly we will get motivating kind of things from Coach Bestwick. But Coach Bestwick made a decision that changed my life. He decided to move me to defensive back. I was a running back at that time. And he said, Randy, he said, you're a good running back, you're our best running back, but I think you can best help the varsity next year as a defensive back. So I made the move, had 2 days of practice, went to South Carolina and had 3 interceptions my first game as a defensive back. And so I kind of fell in love with the position. I was a punt returner, and those were the things that I did well. I had kind of a knack at punt returning. My son, Kelly, inherited that knack. But anyway, that's kind of got me, was the thing that got me on all the All-American teams and helped me with the career that I did have at Georgia Tech. I'm going to correct something that Jim said. I was not drafted by the 49ers. I was actually drafted by the New Orleans Saints. And they were looking for corners. I didn't have the speed to be a corner. So I didn't make it down there and went to Canada and had a pretty successful career in Canada. In 1978, I decided, well, I knew at that point that I wasn't going to play football the rest of my life, and I'd seen how much my father-in-law enjoyed his profession. I chose to go ahead and start school over at Life Chiropractic College and started working my way through that, and actually graduated in 1983 and went into practice. It was about that time that I get a call one day from my brother-in-law, and he had just been named the president of this organization called Northside Youth Organization, or NYO as we all call it. He told me about this program that had a very competitive basketball program. I loved basketball. I loved to coach basketball. And he said, but you can also play baseball there, and you can also play football there. We were living out in Cobb County. My oldest son was at Morgan Falls. So we decided to come on over here and check this place out. And now 30 years later, I guess me and Jane are probably the oldest people here. Jane's the only person I think that has been here longer than me, I would guess. I don't know many. Jane, are there? Early 80s. And now I'm watching a 7-year-old grandson play, and he's soon going to be followed by the Rhino twin girls, my 2 twin granddaughters, who will be, I'm sure, hopefully following in Katie Goldberg's footsteps maybe one day. And then I have another granddaughter, Dallas, who was just born to my oldest grandson, so my oldest son. So we're going to be here a lot of years, God willing. If I could take a few moments now and speak to the parents for just a moment. I have been a parent of a youth athlete and coach having to deal with parents for over 30 years. My main goal as a coach is, number one, to teach, and I'm going to use the term is to teach your children how to play the game the right way. I want my players to love practice. I try and teach my players to practice at full speed, and every year at the end of the Titan summer, the hardest thing, and I usually get pretty emotional with them, the hardest thing for me after the last game, win or lose, is the fact that I do not get to go to practice with them the next day. I love practice. Practice is where you become a team and you become a great athlete, not in games. It's practice. I want to be a positive impact on them as young people, and I push my players pretty hard. I don't know if we've got some Titans here, but it takes them a while to get used to me because I push pretty hard. I correct every mistake that they make, and sometimes in a rather loud voice. But in the same breath, I always make sure that they know that the only thing I'm concerned about is them succeeding as an athlete. And I usually, by the end of the summer, they realize that my bark is a lot louder than his bite, and that I'm pretty much a big teddy bear that's just loud, and that I love them very much. I love to tell kids the story of my, and I was only with him for a couple of weeks, but he taught me something that I always pass on to Titan teams. And that is, he told us that the day your coach stops correcting your mistakes, the day he stops getting on you, is the day typically that he's given up on you. And I'll never forget that exhibition game. I knew I'd made a couple of mistakes, and we went through film. And after the film was over, I thought, I escaped pretty easily. He didn't mention my name one time. And you know what happened to me about 24 hours later? I got cut. Okay? And I'll never forget that. And I always tell Titans, you know, you're in trouble when I stop correcting you. That's when you know you're in trouble, not when I'm on you about doing something better. Couple of good rules that I'd like to pass on to the parents now, that I always tell my Titan parents. just things that'll keep you out of trouble, I guess, would be and that is, don't ever use email or I tell my parents, don't ever email me or talk to me about where your son plays or when he plays. And that is why you go to practice. That is why they are out there. You know, parents hardly see any practices, and they finally come to a game and Junior doesn't start, or he bats ninth in case we're playing baseball, and you know, they get all upset and they haven't seen one practice. So, you know, turn your kids over to these coaches and give them these kids for 2 hours or however long you practice, and however many games you have, and let them be their coaches. This has been something hard for my wife. Some of you who know my wife is one of the most competitive people I've ever met, next to Miss Jane. I knew I was in love with her when we played Monday Night Football on a date one night, and she beat me. And Monday Night Football was an old game that you had this little tray, and the defense had cards and the offense had cards. And she had the ball down on my 1 yard line, and I put in my goal line defense, and she ran a double reverse pass on my 1 yard line and scored. And I said, you can't run that play on the goal line. She says, why not? I did. I knew I was in love with her at that point in time. Anyway, do not coach your child from the bleachers. Young men and women on the practice field and in games especially, they can only listen to one person at one time. And you do more harm than good to your child, to the team, when you yell them instructions. That is the coach's job. I tell my parents, all I want you to do is cheer as loud as you can for our team. Please never undermine your coach or any players on your team sitting down at the dinner table. And maybe you're not real excited and happy about where your son or daughter is playing right now, or how much he's playing, and you start in on poor coach about what a jerk he is and how he's blind, and your son or daughter is sitting there listening to this. Or you might say something about another player that maybe is getting a little bit more time than your child, and your son or daughter hears that, and it affects his position on the team. It affects how he thinks about his teammates. Your coach has given up very precious time, and I tell you, more and more time is so precious as I age, and I think about, you know, I have friends dying of heart attacks every day at my age and stuff, and how precious time is. And these coaches have given up their time, many of them without kids on the team, and you owe it to them the respect of having your child at every event, practice or game. And I don't care whether it's small ball, 4-year-olds, or 5-year-olds, our 5-year-old touch football league, oh, they're only 4 or 5. They are still starting to learn the meaning of commitment. And well, when you become a Titan, we don't even talk about what happens if you miss a practice. It's just not something that is, I don't think it's ever been done, to tell you the truth. So have some, respect for your coach, and have your children at every single event and on time. After a game, and this is really hard, after a game, your child only wants to hear how much you enjoyed watching him play, or her. That's all they want to hear. They don't want to hear how many blocks they missed, or how many fumbles they had, or how many penalties they had. They only want to hear how much you enjoyed watching them play. Let the coach do all that other stuff. And if he's a good coach, he will correct them, and he'll tell them about their mistakes. I love to tell this story about a mom called me one time and left a message on my answering machine. I had been working with the boy in baseball, and her voice sounded like she was calling from Scottish Rite Hospital. She was crying her eyes out, and I could barely understand what she was saying, but she was talking about her son, how everybody feared him, used to fear him as a hitter, and now they didn't, and he was struggling at the plate and in between tears and things, and she said, "Coach, you have to work with him tomorrow." So I gave him a lesson tomorrow. The boy walks in my room. The mother was right behind him. I ran up and hugged him. I said, "Oh, I am so," by the tone of your mother's voice, I thought you had contracted some childhood disease. And you really, all you are is in a little slump. So it is so damaging when parents put so much pressure. Let the coach put the pressure on them. They just want to hear what a good game they played. Probably the best advice that I can give you as parents is not to be so scared, or, well, scared is a good word, of allowing your child to fail. And it is so hard for us as parents. You know, we see our child upset. He comes home, he didn't play as much as he thought he should. They lost the game. You know, and we so much as parents want to protect them from all of that. And it does them such a disservice when we try and protect them from disappointment. I work at Georgia Tech now, and you know, I even hear it from our students there sometimes. Coach Johnson actually has to deal with parents calling him about their child and their playing. I mean, it goes all the way up to college. And we wonder why we have so many young people getting out on their own then and really struggling with disappointment, and you know, they don't get the job they want, they don't get in the sorority they want, they don't, their boyfriend breaks up with them. And you can use, this place is such a wonderful place where you can use it as teaching your children life's tools to get through. Because we all know as adults it's going to be a lot tougher than, you know, coach not putting you in or whatever as you get on in life. But how they deal with these disappointments will better prepare them for the life's really big disappointments that we all are going to come. I'm going to close by talking to the young men, and there might be some young ladies here. And this is a story I heard from a motivational speaker one day, and I've kind of turned it around a little bit. And what this is titled is, "What does it take to be great in anything?" Not just sports I'm talking about. And the answer to that is easily answered in this story. It is a story from a man named Eric Thomas who titled it, "How Bad Do You Want It?" Some of you have maybe heard it before, but it's a great story. There was a young man who wanted to be a great football player. So he went to visit with this aging Hall of Famer who lived in the neighborhood. And he told the old great football player, "I want to be as good as you were someday. I want to play in high school, then I want to play in college, and then I want to play in the NFL. And then I want to be put in the Hall of Fame and have my name up on the stadium." The old-timer looked at the young man and said, "Is that so? Then I want you to meet me tomorrow at the beach, and I will tell you the secret." So the young man came to the beach at the appointed time, dressed in his football uniform. The old man grabs his hand and said, "How bad do you want to be successful?" And he said, "Really bad." He said, "Well, walk on out in the water with me." So they walked out into the water about waist deep. And the kid's thinking to himself, man, this old geezer is crazy. I want to be a great football player, not a great swimmer. I didn't ask you to teach me how to be a lifeguard. I want to be a great football player. So the old man took him out a little deeper, this time up to his chin. Hey, old man, what are you doing? Are you crazy? He then took him out a little further until the young boy could hardly touch the bottom. I'm not about to go out any further with this guy. This guy's out of his mind. And the old man said, I thought you said you wanted to be a great football player. He said, I do. He said, then walk a little farther with me. Once the boy was out over his head, the old man pushed his head down and held him underwater till the young man thought he was going to drown. Just before the young man passed out, the old man pulled him up. He looked the boy square in the eye and said, I got one question for you. When you were underwater and close to passing out, what is the only thing you wanted to do? And the boy looked at him and screamed, I wanted to breathe. The old Hall of Famer then said, when you want to succeed in anything in life as bad as you wanted to breathe, then you will be successful. It's been a great night. I wish y'all the best of luck in the coming season. I will be watching a lot of games. You'll see me just passing, and I will always look out and try and find guys that I've recognized. I will open it up to some questions if anybody had any specific questions about Georgia Tech. We're not going to talk about the evil empire, but I'll talk to you about Georgia Tech or NYO. Y'all seen my shirt right here. I go back, Jane and I go back, I mean, if you've ever seen some of the pictures of this place, when I started over here, that field, her field was a big mantle field where all our big kids played. It was a pasture. You could hit home runs up on the street up there. 17 and 18-year-olds played there. The football field was pretty much as is, not this kind of turf though. The Pony League field was slanted. The baselines were slanted like this. And as you would run down to first, you were always scared that a kid was going to sprain his ankle. I mean, this place was a pretty much dump. Our best field was actually St. John. And then I was part of building the first Field of Dreams, and it was a showcase. I travel all around Atlanta, and next to the East Cobb complex, that's really not like this. This is the greatest complex in the city of Atlanta, trust me. One of the problems I have with the Titan teams is our infields are so good that when they go to other parks, they can't make plays because they're used to this plush infield, and and that field, they're Georgia. I put that right up with Georgia Tech's turf. So I'm so excited about the circle coming back and getting to watch my grandchildren now play here. But anyway, this right here, I cannot think of anything more important to my children or my grandchildren than a place like this. Anyway, any questions? Any Titans here? Yes, I know you. Did I like football or baseball better? That's a great question. And that was a question asked to me by reporters a lot when I was at Tech. I loved baseball because it got me out of spring practice at football. That's the best way. Now, when I was growing up, back then, we didn't have fall baseball. We didn't, and I went from football to basketball to baseball. And so when people would ask me what my favorite sport was, I would tell them it was the sport I was playing at that moment. I loved anything with a ball. Now, have a Rhino try and play some sport without a ball, like swim or dive or something like that, then we're spastic. But put a ball in our hands and we're pretty good. Jane, you have a question?
Randy, I got one. What are some of the lessons you learned from football specifically that you still carry with you today?
Well, football, I mean, it's a cliche, and you've heard it so many times, but it is truly the greatest team sport that God ever put on the earth. You know, when you're out there and you're depending on, if you want to read a good book, read Bill Curry's book. I think it's called 11 Men in the Huddle, and it's just a wonderful a book about his career and men that he would love to see in his huddle. But you depend on each other so much. I give my wife speeches sometimes when we're not getting along, and I'll tell her, "Sweetie, remember, we're a team here." You know, and she'll look at me and say, "I don't want to hear any more of your Titan team speeches. I'm mad." But the setting goals, you and your team, you know, besides winning and losing, we all know that. But the Titans know that I would rather get beat 3-2 and my team get really stretched and really challenged than beat a team 15-0. And you don't learn from those. But, you know, there are times in football that I can remember you just, you know, in the heat and that you want to quit. And sometimes you find these different levels as an athlete that you can go to that you didn't think existed. You know, one more sprint and you throw up, and then the next week you go 2 more sprints before you throw up. That kind of stuff. Those are really the life lessons, I think, that football that I've taken into my adulthood from football.
Any other questions for Randy? Let's give Randy a big round of applause.